What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you The Legend of Korra Season 1, Episode 7 review entitled Aftermath. And to just let me start off to say this. My mind was blown by this episode. I mean, plot twist coming way out of left field. I mean, I knew it was coming, but just not in that particular way. Was actually not expecting that. Again, another well written, incredibly dense episode. Very, very fast paced once again. But whoa. Mind blown, man. Legend of Korra. Gotta be the best cartoon on American TV. Hands down. Has to be. I don't see anything else better than this. But man, so now let me get into this review, and first let me say this. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today because there's going to be no summary. I realized when I was writing up my notes for this that a summary would just get in the way of the analysis. So what you're going to get here with this review is nothing but analysis. If you want to know what happened in the episode, do what I did. Go watch the episode. You don't need a summary. And today I want to touch on 3 key points. The first point I want to touch on is obviously Asami and Hiroshi Sato and that whole subplot that's now going on, and which will probably, if it doesn't get resolved at the end of this season, it'll probably carry on until the end of the series. So it turns out, well, at least I don't want to speak for everybody, but at least for myself and a lot of you guys, when I was going through and reading your comments, a lot of people were wrong about Asami Sato. Now, of course, later down the line, it could be that she's just pretending now and that she'll eventually turn on Korra and the gang. But as it stands right now, a lot of people were wrong about Asami Sato. So it seems like Hiroshi Sato was the real equalist sympathizer. He's the real equalist here, not Asami Sato. And I just have to say, the writing for this particular part of the episode, which was obviously a major part of this episode, but the writing here, B plus, not quite an A, and I'll have to explain why. What we have here is obviously a classic case of a red herring. For those of you who don't know what a red herring is, in literature, a red herring refers to a situation where a reader or a viewer is given clues which suggest that a character is a culprit or somehow suspicious, but in reality, those clues are there to distract you from another person who's actually the culprit. So in this case, we were given a girl, Asami, and it turns out, she took self-defense classes. Her mother was killed by a firebender. She was a good driver. She was, wealthy. It was obvious that at least one equalist who was with Amon was a woman. So all these clues were leading to Asami Sato when in reality, they were all red herrings there to distract us from Hiroshi Sato. Now, of course, there was some, speculation that Hiroshi Sato was also an equalist, but I don't know if there was anybody who thought that Hiroshi Sato was an equalist, but that Asami was not an equalist. That was a very, very interesting plot twist. So, I mean, I certainly didn't predict that, and I don't think I read any comments or saw any other videos where anybody else thought that Hiroshi Sato was an equalist, but Asami was not an equalist. So, again, that was just a very, very interesting plot twist. Here's why I give this part of the episode, although it was very, very interesting, very good writing, very good plot twist. Here's why I give the writing a B plus, and not an A. If you remember when Asami was first introduced, and I believe, if I'm not wrong, I believe it was in episode 4, A Voice in the Night, I said that her introduction was obviously very suspicious. She runs into Mako, on the street with her moped. She just happens to like the fire ferrets. She buys him dinner. And not only does she buy him dinner, she buys him a new outfit. She buys him new clothes. When was the last time a woman took you out to dinner and then on top of that bought you some new clothes? I mean, that's never happened to me. especially not after being run into with a moped. I mean, I'm just saying. Maybe Mako's got that, Don Juan thing going on, but that's never happened to me or anybody else that I know. And on top of that, she gets her father to give the fire ferrets 30,000 yuans. Now, of course, we now know that Hiroshi Sato had ulterior motives, but she actually was in on trying to convince her father to give them the 30,000 yuans. So to me, this was very suspicious. And from a narrative standpoint, like I said before, it was very, very implausible. And so I said at the time, if Asami does not turn out to be a traitor, then it'll just be bad writing because, again, that's just highly implausible. And now we know that Asami is not a traitor, and therefore we're still left. Even though the plot was rather interesting, the plot twist they had was rather interesting, we're still left with this initial introduction of Asami that is, from a narrative standpoint, highly implausible. But I will say this. The even though that scenario is highly implausible, I think that in a lot of ways the plot twist compensates for this lack of plausibility, which is why I still say B plus. And also the fact that Hiroshi Sato is an equalist or an equalist sympathizer, and the fact that Asami is not, is very, very good writing, because what it does is it sets up an alternate conflict. We know that the central conflict is going to obviously be Korra versus Amon, but now, in addition to that central conflict, we also have another alternate, side conflict that's also as equally compelling and as equally interesting as whatever the conflict between Korra and Amon will be. At least I think at this point in the series. And also, while I was watching this episode, just in the back of my mind, while I was watching this episode, one thing was absolutely clear to me, and it was this. If Asami was an equalist, then Hiroshi Sato must also be an equalist. There was really no way for Asami to be an equalist, but for Hiroshi Sato not to be an equalist. And the reason why I say that is because although Asami is Hiroshi Sato's daughter, she doesn't have direct access to his money or his resources. So Hiroshi Sato is the one with the wealth. He's the one with the industrial resources needed to fund this sort of technological research that the equalists need in order to build things like those electric gauntlets, and hell, to build an entire airship. And not just to build it, but to hide an entire airship. Because as we found out in this episode, this man had a factory built underneath his mansion. So Hiroshi Sato is not just rich, this man is wealthy. And, even though, like I said, even though Asami is Hiroshi Sato's daughter, she just doesn't have the industrial resources, the money, none of what's necessary to fund the sort of technological research that the equalists need in order to have a level playing field when they fight against the Benders. So that was clear to me. But again, I never expected Hiroshi Sato to be the equalist, but not Asami. That just, completely out of left field. Now let me address my second key point, which is the politics of this series. And of course, I have to address the politics. They're the most important aspect of this series. So let me say this. There is a real danger with Korra's character development. Now, I've already said that there's a real danger with respect to how Korra is shaping up versus Amon. There's a real danger that Amon could overshadow her. And even now, the fact that I'm talking about the politics suggests that even when Amon doesn't appear in an episode, he's commanding center stage. Even when Korra's in the episode and Amon's not there, Amon still seems to be able to grab the spotlight away from Korra. Because what's the major aspect of this episode? The equalists and the political confrontation between benders and non-benders. So even when Amon's not in the episode, it's still possible for him to overshadow Korra a little bit. But like I said, there's a real danger with Korra's character development, because we're dealing with an incredibly complex political situation. And it's not at all clear to me that Korra has the type of character or character development that will allow her to understand the political nuances of the situation and effectively find a way to take away the political and moral high ground that Amon seems to have right now. And here's what I mean when I say that Amon has the political and moral high ground. First of all, Amon is not a villain. I know there's some reviewers out there who, slip up and say Amon's the villain of the series. Amon is not a villain. In order to be a villain, you have to be irredeemably evil. And as far as we've seen through these past 7 episodes, Amon is not irredeemably evil. In fact, now, this is the case. He is an antagonist. An antagonist is just someone who opposes the protagonist. Korra's obviously the protagonist of this series. So he's not a villain, but he is an antagonist. And not only is he not a villain, but it seems like his actions are justified. And they're not just justified because, Amon's has, Amon seems to be doing good things. Not just that, but he's a character with a specific political ideology. His actions are justified by a political ideology that seems to be an accurate view of the world. So it's not just that Amon is doing good things by taking away bending from, the bending mafias, or taking away bending from Tano and the Wolfbats. It's that his actions are motivated by a specific political ideology. That's the part that's going to kill Korra when she eventually has to address this political conflict. That's what's really gonna hurt Korra in this conflict, because she doesn't seem to have any sort of political ideology that could oppose Amon's conception of the way the world works when it comes down to benders versus non-benders. So there's a real danger, not only that Amon's character could overshadow Korra's character, but that from the standpoint of the central conflict of the series, which is a political conflict, it seems like Amon could have the political and moral high ground here. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how the writers force Korra to confront a political situation when it's clear that her character and her character development isn't quite geared toward understanding the political nuances of the situation that she confronts, that she faces. So that's going to be very interesting. Not only that, we now understand that because Hiroshi Sato, and this is very, very interesting, we're given a protagonist, Korra, and the crux of a protagonist is that this is the character who the readers and the viewers are supposed to identify with and sympathize with the most. So even though Korra is the protagonist and we're supposed to sympathize and identify with her the most, we're given an antagonist who has the political and moral high ground. And we have another character, Hiroshi Sato, who betrays the protagonist in some way. Not just betrays the protagonist, but also betrays his daughter and allies with someone who has the political and moral high ground. Generally, when the protagonist gets betrayed, the person who does the betraying allies himself with a villain, and we're supposed to see his betrayal as being wrong. But if Amon has the moral and political high ground, then it not only seems that Hiroshi Sato is not wrong in betraying his daughter and in betraying Korra, it seems like that's the right thing for him to do. It seems like it's rational and reasonable for him to ally himself with Amon. And not only that, his wife was killed by benders. His wife was killed by a firebender. And so the viewer is left with the question, who is supposed to protect non-benders in this world? If Amon is telling the truth, then his parents were killed by firebenders. Bamako and Bolin's parents were killed by firebenders. Hiroshi Sato's wife was killed by firebenders. I mean, is it just firebenders? Are the firebenders just going crazy? Who is supposed to protect non-benders in the bending world is the basic question that Amon is posing to us. And it seems like at every level, we have to answer not benders. Because these people are in a bending world where benders seem to have the power. They seem to have all the political power. Not only that, the non-benders are being terrorized in this world. And not only are they being terrorized by benders, but who do they have to depend on to protect them? More benders. How crazy is that? Where you're being terrorized by a group of people and you have to rely on another group of people who have that same power to protect you. Who protects the non-benders in this world? I mean, that's a legitimate question, and it seems like it's going to have to be a question that Korra confronts as this series progresses. I mean, that's just a very crazy situation. The non-benders are literally in between a rock and a hard place. They're terrorized by benders. They're not being protected, and then they have to rely on more benders to protect them. The same people who control power and most of the political power and most of the military power, they have to depend on them to protect them from other benders? I mean, again, who's going to protect the non-benders in this world? Especially if they can't defend themselves. And this is very, very interesting because remember, when Amon gave that speech in the last episode, he said technology is now the great equalizer. We don't have to rely on benders to protect us from other benders. We can protect ourselves. And not only can we protect ourselves, we should protect ourselves because they're not going to protect us. Obvious that they're not. So we have to protect ourselves, and technology is the great equalizer. So again, how is Korra going to deal with this situation? How is Korra going to deal with this political situation? And let me just say this. If Korra does not address the political aspects of this conflict, I will drop the series. I'm letting you guys know right now. If she does not eventually address the political aspects of this series, I'm dropping the series. The political conflict is the central conflict of the story. So how could you have a protagonist who doesn't address the central conflict of the story? So I just want to make that clear. And on top of that, it seems like, again, Korra is not yet, let me say this, yet, because it's too early to put this series down. Yet. Korra is not equipped to deal with the political subtleties of this situation. And it seems like she's going to have to go through some serious character development, or else she's going to be irrelevant. Because a protagonist who doesn't address the central conflict of the story is, for all intents and purposes, absolutely irrelevant. And I've already pointed out, again, Amon is a serious danger that Amon could overshadow Korra. And I think as it stands now, Amon is definitely overshadowing Korra. So again, we go back to this question of how does Korra deal with this? And this is where the scene with Tano in this episode is very, very important because it gives us a lot of insight into Korra's character, or rather, some insight into her lack of character development and lack of characterization when it comes to how she's supposed to confront the political aspects of this narrative. So just to go off on a little quick tangent, very, very important. Tano confirms that his bending is permanently taken away. He says he's going to the best healers, and from what everybody can tell, whatever Amon did to him, it permanently took away his bending. So it seems like at this point in the series, it's being confirmed that Amon can permanently take away your bending. This isn't some kind of hoax. He can permanently take away your bending. Now, let me come back to this question of how Korra deals with the political aspects of this series. We get this scene where Tano and Korra are having a conversation. And in this conversation, Tano expresses no guilt, no remorse for how he's abused his bending of powers to basically bully the referees into helping the Wolfbats win multiple championships. He has no guilt for that, no remorse for that. And then Tano tells Korra to get Amon for him. And Korra's basic reaction was, okay. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, is Korra fighting for people like Tano? Jackasses who use their bending abilities to terrorize non-benders? This is who she's fighting for? Tano asks Korra to get Amon for him, And her basic response is, okay. So again, we see Korra's character development and her characterization is lacking when it comes to how she confronts the political subtleties and political nuances of the situation. Korra needs to gain some ethical complexity, some political complexity too, and she needs to gain it real fast, or else her character development, her characterization is going to go straight downhill. Now there is a way out. It's not a very good way out, but there is a way out where the writers wouldn't have to force Korra to confront these political situations directly. They could just give Amon some evil ulterior motive. Amon could not really be about, equality and justice. He could have some evil ulterior motive, but this would be lazy writing for these guys. Not only would it be lazy, but it would be bad writing, because you can't start off with a complex premise in a story and then reduce things to black and white. You can't ask the reader or the viewer to take the series seriously at the beginning and then just drop that complexity. You could start off simple and keep things simple. You can also start off simple and then make things more complex as the story progresses. But what you can't do as a writer is start off complex and then end simply. Because if you do that, what'll happen? We'll end up with another Aang versus Ozai, another black and white situation with a good protagonist and an evil villain. And that's boring. I mean, who wants to see the same thing in the Avatar, The Last Airbender series, and then again in the Legend of Korra series? That's just boring. That's lazy writing, and it would be bad writing to boot. So they've already done this black and white thing. So I hope they don't reintroduce this with Amon and try and pull this little, well, Amon, look, he has some evil ulterior motive. Because we've seen that so many times, and it's too cliche. Now, let me address my third important point for this episode. I'm loving The Legend of Korra because it seems like we have a very, very strong lineup of female characters. And I'm loving this. Not just Korra, but Lin Beifong and now Asami. I'm loving these strong female characters. Goodness gracious. I'm loving it. We already know Korra is a very strong female protagonist. Very, very forceful, very, very aggressive personality. We also know the same thing is true about Lin Beifong. Lin Beifong is a formidable warrior in her own right. And we also know that she has a very, very strong sense of self. And she also has a very, very strong sense of duty. Because as she said in this episode, protecting Republic City is all I care about. But now she's taken on another character role or another narrative position. She's become an outlaw. Because she basically says at the end of this episode, I can't work with the metal bending police force anymore. I now want to go after Amon outside of the law. So now she's sort of filling in that outlaw archetype, which is really a position that's generally reserved for men, and now is being filled by Lin Beifong, that hard edge character who's also an outlaw. Think of characters like Hiei. Now, I'm not saying Lin Beifong is like Hiei. I'm just saying that the outlaw archetype, she fulfills that same outlaw archetype that characters like Hiei fulfills, or characters like Kurapika fills. Someone who doesn't work well within groups and who tends to work outside of the society's conventions or outside the law. So that's a character archetype generally reserved for men, and now we have a very, very strong female character in Lin Beifong who's now filling that archetypal role. I love it. I just love it. And honestly, I would have to say that I really, really like. I mean, I don't think there's any characters that I dislike in this series. I like them all, but I think Lin Beifong is probably my favorite character. I think she's probably my favorite character. I really, really like Lin Beifong. Now we have Asami added to Korra and Lin Beifong. She defies her father. I mean, she's not some shrinking violet here. And we now know that Asami versus Hiroshi will be a major subplot throughout this series. It has to be. Unless they're going to resolve it at the end of this season, which I don't really think it will be, unless there's some major developments with respect to some ulterior motives that Amon has, which leads Hiroshi Sato to switch from Amon back over to Korra's side and to reunite with his daughter. But Asami, because of this conflict now between Asami Sato and Hiroshi Sato, between daughter and father, Asami now takes center stage because she has a major part to play in a major subplot in this series. And she's a strong female character, defies her father, puts on that electric gauntlet, shocks him, shocks the other equalists who are there. Very strong female character. I'm loving her character. And now it looks like the group is complete because it now looks like Korra's going to be the head, Mako, Bolin, now Asami, including Tenzin and Lin Beifong. So that seems to be the group that's developing. At least that's the impression I got at the end of this episode because Asami Sato was the one who helped them escape from Hiroshi Sato. So it looks like that's going to be the group. And it's a hell of a group, man. I have to say, it's looking awesome, man. It's looking absolutely awesome. So the only thing that would make this series perfect is when Korra gets the characterization and character development that she needs to confront this sort of complex political situation. But The Legend of Korra is fulfilling my expectations, exceeding my expectations. Awesome series. One other thing. When are you gonna see Korra airbend? That's the only other thing. That's the only other question I have. We all often hear that she's training with her airbending, but when are we actually going to see her train with her airbending? When are we going to see her master airbending? Because after all, this is the Book of Air, the first book. So at some point, we should be seeing her complete her airbender training and see her master airbending. I would like to see that at some point in time. I want to see her get, all four elements so that she can unblock her chakras and go into the avatar state and whoop some ass. That's what I want to see, man. That's what I want to see. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day, and can't wait for the next episode of The Legend of Korra.